Hi, my name is Michael Washington. I'm going to be talking about Blazor with Azure B2C, Authentication and Authorization. Again, I'm Michael Washington. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I have written a couple of books about Blazor, some available on Amazon.com, and others. I actually have 3 free books that you can download from syncfusion.com. Okay, so I'm going to go through a lot of stuff. First, going to talk about what is Azure B2C, why would you want to use it. We're going to show how to create a app registration to allow our Blazor application to communicate with Azure B2C. We're then going to configure a sample Blazor app, show you how to wire everything up. I will have a couple of slides covering the difference between a user flow, which is what I'll show in detail, and a custom policy, which allows you to do anything. And then we're going to finish the second half of this, where I'll be diving into C# code to explain how you can make your Blazor app communicate with programmatically with your Azure B2C tenant. I'll be specifically handling situations like how do you put a person to, say, an administrator group, determine if that person is an administrator or not, to show certain menus and admin functions, and then to perform administration functions. So that will be the last half. Will actually be I'll be diving into C# code. Okay, about Azure B2C. Your normal application, reading from left to right, the person logs into your web application to either create an account or log into an existing account, and everything happens inside the application. You know, the users are stored in the database. With this flow, again, reading from left to right, you have your web application, but when a person creates an account or logs into an existing account, they're actually directed to Azure B2C. So all the users will actually end up in Azure B2C, and that's where we'll be able to have conditional access policies, enforce multi-factor authentication, and apply all the security. The application can still have the users in the database, but you see how Azure B2C kind of sits there in the middle. Some of the features is that it's a custom branded identity solution. So therefore, the login and create screens can be totally customized, so you can look attractive like you see here. Single sign-on access with multiple providers. They have a lot that are already out of the box. Your Facebooks, Twitters, even you can have your own custom providers. On the right-hand side, you can authenticate against web APIs, web apps, which I'll be showing, and also, of course, mobile apps. It integrates with external user stores. So, for example, the users can actually be stored in a store outside of Azure, but Azure will still be in the middle to provide a lot of functionality, but it is that extensible. There's a lot of features that come. For example, progressive profiling. When the person creates an account, you only gather certain amounts of information, and then you can gather more information as they log in at later times. Of course, you can define all these fields and push these values to other systems. There's a lot of other features it has. One of the most important ones, and this is why I use Azure B2C for all my real applications, is you can have things like a third party that has a digital risk score, and you can configure that with Azure B2C so that if there's a high risk of this person, then multi-factor will be triggered, or perhaps they're being denied. So this is your best defense against hackers, password spray, those sorts of people trying to attack your application. So things like this is why I use Azure B2C for my applications. Now, how do you set it up? Go to portal.azure.com, create an Azure account if you don't already have one. It's free. Go ahead, click Create Resource, search for Azure Active Directory B2C, and then go ahead and click that Create button. Here's the thing, it's free. For 50,000 users or less, like I said, it's totally free. So go ahead and go for it. They do, of course, have paid SKUs, but the cost is really, really low. But again, if you're just playing around with it, just go ahead and click that Create button because it's free. You'll click Create a new Azure AD B2C tenant, and then you just have to give a unique name. click Review and Create, and boom, you set it up. To get back to it, if you go to All Resources, search for the name you created, it'll show up. If you click on it, you'll be at the Azure B2C object, not actually in the tenant. So I have that big arrow there that shows that you have to click that button to actually go into the tenant to perform the functionality that I'll be describing. The first thing you need to do to allow your application to communicate with Azure B2C is create a registration. It's very easy. You click on App Registrations, click New Registration. These are some default values here. Click Register. It's created. So now we're going to configure what we call a user flow. This will describe and control the process of a person signing up for a new account or signing into an existing account, and of course all the options. So we go into user flows, we click new user flow. There's a number of flows, they're adding new ones all the time, but we're going to go with the most simplest one, sign up and sign in. Of course, you'll use the recommended version, click create. We'll give it a name. You see number 1 there. We're going to use that name later on in the Blazor app. We're just going to click a couple of default settings, but here there's a lot of options. For the account verification, we'll just say email, but they do have some other ones which are kind of nice. It'll send a text or even call them on the phone and read off a number. And for the attributes, you want to say show more, and you'll see there's a number of attributes. You can do some customization to collect more if need be, but we can just check these boxes here, click OK, click Create, and we've now set up the user flow. It's that easy. The name there, we're going to need that name in the next steps. Okay, so now let's go to the Blazor app. So open up Visual Studio, say create new project. We're going to select Blazor Server app. Yes, this does work with Blazor client, and actually all Microsoft technologies. However, with Blazor client, it's a lot more steps. So Blazor Server is actually what I use mostly, and it's really easy. Give your Blazor app a name. And number 2 here, that's the important one. You want to select Microsoft Identity Platform. Make sure you select HTTPS. Click Create. A box is going to pop up and say, I need to configure some components. You click Finish, and then you're done. Okay, so I did videos just because it's faster, and but let's just see what that looks like. So we'll basically say create a server app. We'll click Next. We'll give it a name. Click Next again. This is the important step here. Authentication type, you'll select Microsoft Identity Platform. Make sure HTTPS is checked. Click Create. It's going to think about it for a minute. And then a box will pop up and it will say that it needs to configure the Microsoft Identity tool. You click Finish, and then we're ready to go. And first slide. Okay, we do need to add the URL of the app in Azure B2C so that it recognizes it. So to get that URL, if we go into Launch Settings in the Blazor app, we can copy the application URL, make sure it's the one that begins with HTTPS. We then copy that, go back into our Azure B2C portal, go to the app registration that we created earlier, and we click the button that says Add a Redirect URI. We select Add a Platform, Add Web, and under Redirect URI, we put in that URL to our app, and we put /signin OIDC at the end, and that's where it's going to redirect the person after they've been authenticated. If we move the app to production or any other environment, we will have to come in and add the Redirect URI for any other environment that the app is in. So now we're going to go back to the Blazor app. We're going to go into the app settings, and we're going to paste in what you see at the top there. What's in yellow is what we have to customize. There's 4 yellow boxes there. However, there's actually only 3 unique ones, which is the Azure B2C domain name, our application client ID, and our sign-up policy. So where do we get those? If we go back to our Azure B2C tenant, we'll see domain name is right there, so copy that. To get the client ID, we go to app registrations, go to the app registration we created, and the client ID will be right there. And finally, we go to user flows and we copy the name of the user flow and we put those values in the app settings file and we're ready to go. So at this point, we could hit F5 in Visual Studio and run the app. We'll log in and we'll be presented with a screen like this. This right here is totally customized based upon the options we chose. And obviously the look and feel can be changed. And even actually the steps can be changed if you use a more advanced configuration. But the default looks like this. The person puts in their username and email, clicks send verification code. An email is sent with a code. They come back, put that code in, click verify code. And then at that point, they can put the name that they want to use, click continue, and then it will sign them in. So let's just take a look and see what that looks like. So again, we just click F5. The person is, authenticates. They put their username and email, and they click the button so that they'll be sent in, because we configured email verification. They're sent an email with the verification code. Go ahead and copy that code, put it in the box, click verify code. It's been verified. And then they put their name that they want to be known as. They click continue, and it's going to redirect them into the app and log them in. The next time they come to the app, obviously they've already had an account created, and then of course would just log them in. Here's a couple of quick slides on custom policies. I'm not going to go into how you make custom policies because it would take me like 2 hours, but I just want you to know what the difference is and kind of how that process works. So here's, I know, a big chart here, but the big difference between the two is really right down there. So I'll call your attention to things like you can have custom identity providers that are not built in. You can actually provision the account against another system. So like when the person's logging in, you want to check some tax database on-prem and configure something there during the sign-up process. So this is considered an advanced configuration, and you would have to use custom policies for that. There's a lot of other stuff that it does, but this kind of gives you an idea. So we previously went to the user flows, but for custom policies, you would click on Identity Experience Framework. If it's the first time using it, you have to create a signing and encryption key. It's a wizard that walks you through. You create a Identity Experience Framework application and a proxy application. And then you kind of have to download this starter pack because it's 3 really large XML files. And kind of the way the flow works is they build upon each other. So you have a relaying policy file, and that's the file that a person pretty much is hitting when they, are trying to log in or create an account. That inherits from an extension file, and that inherits from a base file. Looking at this another way, on the left-hand side there, your base file on the bottom left there kind of describes your tenant and your keys and that sort of thing. The extensions file has things like, okay, here's our Twitter authentication keys and that sort of thing. And the relaying policy file is what you typically have per application. So this one application, they can have these options to log in and the flow goes this way, but this other application is another way. And inside the app settings file of the Blazor app, we will point to that particular relaying policy file. So the files themselves are really big, and that's where you did all that configuration. So it just kind of shows you an overview of how this thing works. Okay, so for the last part of this, I want to dive into some C# code that kind of shows you how you can get your Blazor app to communicate with your Azure B2C tenant. So if we go look in the Azure B2C tenant, every user who's signed in and created an account will be there. You can search for a user, you can pull up the user, and you can change the groups that they're in and totally manage them. If it's a local account, you can actually change their password, all sorts of things. So we want to have our Blazor app perform some of those functionality. So the difference is that we're going to create a new app registration, and this app registration will actually have to have API permissions. We're communicating on the Microsoft Graph, And for this demo, these are the permissions that are required. We will also, of course, create an app secret. So all the code that I'll be showing next is a GitHub project that I have, and I'll have the links so you can download all this code. So that's the app I'll be covering. So in that app, we specify the client app and client secret of this new app registration that we created. And we'll go into our Azure B2C tenant, go to groups, create a new group, and we're going to create a group called Simple Survey Administrators. We're then going to put some of our users in that group. So these people are administrators. So now our first task is when those people log into our Blazor app, how do we detect that they are in that group? So in this case, when they log in, we want them to see the administration section in the navigation. So all the communication is done on the Microsoft Graph. So we add the NuGet package for Microsoft Graph. At the time I created this code, some of the calls were on the beta endpoint. So I just always add both the Microsoft Graph NuGet package and the Microsoft Graph beta NuGet package. I also have some helper code that just simplifies the code that's needed to make the calls. Again, all this can be downloaded from the GitHub that I'll give you the link to. It's not a lot of code, but it is some helper code to make the coding less. So in Blazor, that nav menu is in navmenu.razor. So I open that up, and then I add some using statements, and I add some global variables to hold a collection of user groups that the person has. And this right here is the most complex code that I'm going to show you. And what it is we're going to create a iConfidential client application object so that we can communicate with the Microsoft Graph. We're getting some of the configuration settings that I showed you earlier, and it just basically builds the confidential client. As far as the scopes, I basically say, give me the default, which is all the ones I defined for the app registration. And then it's basically going to say, okay, acquire a token, with those scopes, which are basically permissions. Next, and this one's really important, this code here is Blazor code that basically says, give me the current user. Now for the current user, when I look in claims and I look for this specific claim, this gives me the user ID. This user ID is the Azure B2C GUID that truly represents the user. At this point, I can make a Microsoft Graph call for that user, and I say, give me the members of, which is going to tell me the groups that this person is a member of. And again, this is using that helper class. So I basically say, pass the results to the display groups method. The display groups method simply gets all the groups that the person's in, basically sees if any of those are the administrator group, and if so, is admin will be set. Is admin is set, basically the administration link will show. Let's go ahead and take a quick look and see what that looks like. And actually, I got the wrong video. That's the one. Sorry about that. Okay, so when the person logs in, again, this app has more options for them to log in. But when they log in, this is that block of code that I showed you before, which basically determines who the person is. And you see that's the GUID that represents the person in the Azure B2C tenant. It says, get all the groups, pass it to this method, and the person's in one group, which happens to be that administration group. So therefore, this next block of code will basically detect that the person is in that administration group that we're looking for, and it'll then set the isAdmin Boolean to true. And because that's been set to true, the block of code to display the administration section will be triggered, and they are an administrator. We have an administration page that shows all the users that are in the tenant, and it even has a search box so that we can search for a specific person. How does that work? Okay, I have the administration razor page, and I am simply able to make a call to the Microsoft Graph that just says, get me all the users. If I'm searching for a specific person, I basically have that same call, but I, of course, put the little question mark thing here, and then I can have a filter that allows me to, search. And then, of course, I've got this page where it just displays all the people in a graph. I mean, in a table, sorry. So quickly how that looks, we click on that administration page, and it hits this piece of code, which basically makes a call to the graph to get all the users. And however, it only displays the first 100. You actually would have to do a paging, more code to actually page it to continue to pull them. But to do a search, basically the code is the same except the filter. I pass in who I'm searching for. The results are passed to that same method, display users. And in this case, it's only going to pull back one user. And then the screen is going to show that user. Okay. And the final one here is editing a user and their groups. So we have an edit user control, and in this control, I display their name and I allow this to be changed. And if you hit the save button, it'll be changed programmatically. You can even delete the user. What does that look like? Okay, the control, I just passed the graph user object from the main page to that edit control, and I just display that information. When a person makes a change, they can either save or they can even delete the user. What does that code look like? It's actually quite simple. We basically create a user object that only has the fields that we want to update. We then pass, I showed you how to get that GUID ID of the user. We then pass in just the fields we want to change, and we just call update. And it's really that simple. Deleting is even simpler. This right here is just describing, I have a box that pops up and says, are you sure you want to delete? But once you're ready to delete, again, you just pass that GUID of that user, and you just basically call delete. And it's that simple. Take a quick look at that. Oh, actually, I've got one more quick demo I'm going to do after this one for adding the person to a group. So here, it's showing how I've changed the name. I put test at the end of everything there. I click save, and basically that user, only the fields that I'm updating are in this user object, and that's it. It updates. And I did not show delete because, well, I would lose my account there. Okay, and here's a final demo, which is editing user groups. So here, if a person is an administrator, we can click the button to remove them from the group. And if they're not an administrator, we can click a button to add them to the group. So what does that look like? The only thing that's kind of different here is that to add a person to and from a group, you need the group ID, which is a GUID. So this code shows how I actually get that GUID. So it basically says search in groups for a group that starts with that administrator group name, and then now look in there for the one that truly matches and get the ID, which is the GUID. So once I have that, that's all I need to programmatically put people, to make the calls to put people programmatically in and out of that group. So here's what the code looks like to put a person in the group. I have a directory object, which is pretty much that person's GUID. I have the group ID. I then pass in that directory object thing that I just did there, and I just simply call add async. And to take a person out of the group, even simpler, again, you just have that group ID, you have that person's GUID, and then you just call delete. Take a quick look and see what that looks like. So here, if they're not in the group, I click add to the group. I use that code to determine what the group ID was. Here, I'm just showing you that I was able to get to that user, but all I really need is this directory object where I pass in that person's user ID, the group ID, the user ID, add async, and that puts them in the group. So if I continue it here, and then I go into the user, I see the person, you're now an administrator. To take them out, it's that code where it's pretty much pass the group ID, pass the GUID for the user ID, call delete async, and they'll be removed from the group. And we go continue. And when we go back in, we see they're no longer in the group. Okay. Current slide. So all the code that I covered, all the slides, as well as more, there are a series of blog posts. All that is on my website, blazorhelpwebsite.com. When you go there, there's a filter. You'll filter it to Azure B2C. So that way you'll see the series of blog posts that cover this presentation. And like I said, there'll be links to all the code. So again, that's on blazorhelpwebsite.com. And that's it. Thank you for watching.
All right, Michael, that's a lot of stuff you covered in 30 minutes. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Let's take a minute here to kind of highlight a couple of comments or questions that actually came through.
Okay.
But my takeaway is from this: don't try to do this by yourself, because this is hard, right? Like the two-factor authentication and the user email flows. This is hard business.
Yes. Do not roll your own security.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to share my screen here for just a second
Okay.
here, Michael, and maybe try to highlight a couple of things. I think you already pointed at this. So Blazor Help website, that's where you can find Michael writing about this, right? Looks like there is a post where people can go find more info, so thank you for that. You have some good comments here. A lot of people appreciating what you have showed off here, Michael. Shannon Dunn, loving the session. If we wanted to do this on Blazor Wasm, are there docs available?
Yes, there are. And again, I really was going to try to cover that in this presentation, but there's so many steps. Microsoft actually does have official documentation on the Blazor documentation. If you go to blazor.net and go to documentation, they actually do have official documentation.
Awesome. One last thing here. Web API written in Windows authentication, roles-based authorization. How do you integrate? Do you have any pointers?
Again, that identity experience, the custom policies, it will do anything. So there's a learning curve. I have literally spent, 20 hours trying to get a policy correct, but it can do anything.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that identity thing that you said is just like one drop down, and it does so much. And I think the good thing here is something that Drew is pointing out. Like, this is not just for Blazor, right? Because I mean, we can use.
Oh yes, of course. I'm sorry. It's for everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I'm excited about .NET MAUI and other ways in which you can bring in ACS. So awesome stuff, Michael. Thank you. And I don't know who this person is, but your content is hot. I don't know how they can follow it up, but we shall see.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for showing us so many things in half an hour. Much appreciate your time, and we'll let you go here. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.